I never imagined that running a small quarry in rural Montana would turn me into the most hated man in Meadowbrook Heights. But here we are, standing in my lawyer's office while the HOA president threatens to sue me into oblivion over dust complaints. My name is Samuel Anderson, and I inherited 40 acres of prime limestone deposits from my grandfather 3 years ago. The property sat at the edge of Flathead County, about 15 miles outside of Kalispell, where the mountains meet the valley floor in a stretch of rugged beauty that takes your breath away. My grandfather had operated a modest quarry there since the 1970s, supplying crushed stone and aggregate to local construction companies. When he passed, I left my job as a civil engineer in Billings to take over the family business. The quarry operation was small by industry standards. We employed 8 people, ran 2 excavators, a crusher, and a fleet of dump trucks that hauled material to job sites across northwestern Montana. We followed every environmental regulation, held all the proper permits from the state, and operated well within the noise ordinances. My grandfather had been meticulous about compliance, and I continued that tradition. The problem started when Meadowbrook Heights sprouted up like mushrooms after rain. 5 years ago, a development company bought 200 acres adjacent to my property and started building what they marketed as a luxury mountain community. They carved streets into the hillside, planted ornamental trees, and erected cookie-cutter McMansions with vinyl siding and 3-car garages. The homes sold quickly to retirees from California and tech workers who could work remotely, people who wanted the Montana lifestyle without understanding what rural living actually meant. My property predated their development by decades. I had an established commercial operation with grandfather rights that protected my business from most zoning changes, but the new residents did not care about any of that. They wanted their mountain views without the reality of living near an active quarry. The HOA formed 6 months after the first families moved in. Within a year, they started sending me letters. The first few were politely worded requests to consider reducing operations during weekend hours and exploring dust mitigation strategies. I responded professionally, explaining that we already used water trucks to suppress dust, operated only during permitted hours, and followed all state and county regulations. I even invited the HOA board to tour the facility so they could see our environmental controls firsthand. None of them accepted the invitation. The letters grew more aggressive. They demanded I cease operations entirely, claiming the quarry violated their community covenants. I had my attorney, Frank Richardson, send them a response explaining that HOA covenants only applied to properties within their development, not to pre-existing commercial operations on adjacent land. They did not appreciate that clarification. Then came the complaints to every government agency they could find. The Montana Department of Environmental Quality showed up to inspect our air quality controls. The county sent code enforcement officers to verify our permits. The state mining board conducted an unscheduled audit. Every inspection came back clean, but each one cost me time and money to accommodate. The HOA president, a woman named Deborah Patterson, led the charge against me. She was 52 years old, had moved from San Diego 2 years ago, and apparently believed that her property value concerns trumped my legal right to operate a business. She showed up at county commission meetings with PowerPoint presentations about dust particles and property devaluation. She organized her neighbors to flood the commission with emails demanding action. I attended those meetings too, sitting in the back row and listening to people who had lived in Montana for less than 3 years lecture longtime residents about community standards. The county commissioners knew the situation was ridiculous, but they had to take constituent complaints seriously. Things escalated last October when Deborah and 3 other board members showed up at my quarry gate with a camera crew from the local news station. They wanted footage of our trucks kicking up dust for a story about industrial operations threatening residential neighborhoods. My foreman, Jack Morrison, called me immediately. I drove down from the office trailer to find Deborah standing outside the fence, pointing at a truck leaving the scale house while a reporter filmed. The truck was driving on our private road, moving at maybe 10 miles per hour, with water trucks having dampened the surface an hour earlier. There was minimal dust, Mr. Anderson, Deborah called out when she saw me. We're documenting the pollution your operation creates daily. These particulates are damaging our homes and threatening our health. I kept my voice level. Mrs. Patterson, you're filming a truck on private property following all dust control protocols. If you have concerns, the proper channel is through the DEQ, which has already inspected us twice this year. The DEQ is clearly not doing their job, she snapped. We have rights as homeowners to clean air and peaceful enjoyment of our properties. And I have the right to operate a legal business that predates your development by 40 years, I replied. My grandfather built this quarry when this area was nothing but ranch land. The news story aired that evening. They edited it to make the operation look worse than it was, using tight shots that made our modest facility appear massive and industrial. They interviewed Deborah, who claimed property values in Meadowbrook Heights had dropped 15% because of the quarry. They gave me 30 seconds to respond, using a clip where I looked irritated and defensive. The next morning, my phone rang before 6. It was Frank Richardson. Sam, the HOA filed for an injunction, he said. They're asking a judge to shut down your operation pending a full environmental review. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Can they do that? They can file whatever they want. Winning is another matter. We'll fight it, but you need to prepare for this to get expensive. The legal battle consumed the next 8 months. The HOA hired a firm out of Missoula that specialized in environmental law. They produced expert witnesses who testified about dust exposure and noise pollution. They submitted property value assessments claiming the quarry had cost homeowners millions in lost equity. They argued that modern environmental standards should apply regardless of when the operation began. Frank countered with our own experts, documented proof of our compliance with every regulation, and testimony from county officials confirming we operated legally. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Martha Chen who had presided over Flathead County cases for 20 years, seemed skeptical of the HOA's arguments from the start. Counsel, she said during one hearing, looking over her glasses at the HOA's attorney. Your clients bought homes next to an established quarry. What exactly did they expect? But the legal fees mounted. Between attorney costs, expert witnesses, and lost time dealing with depositions and court appearances, the lawsuit cost me over $80,000. The quarry made decent money, but those kinds of expenses hurt a small business. Judge Chen finally ruled in my favor in early June. She dismissed the injunction request and ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees. Her written opinion was scathing, noting that the HOA had attempted to use the legal system to eliminate a legally operating business that predated their development, showing either a fundamental misunderstanding of property law or a willful disregard for it. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the ruling, Deborah called an emergency HOA meeting. I heard about it from Tom Wenzel, one of the more reasonable Meadowbrook Heights residents who occasionally bought stone from me for landscaping projects. He stopped by the quarry office to give me a heads up. Sam, they're planning something, Tom said, looking uncomfortable. Deborah's convinced the board that if they can't stop you legally, they need to make operating the quarry so difficult that you'll close voluntarily. What does that mean? I asked. I don't know specifics, but the meeting got heated. A few of us argued that you won in court and they should drop it, but Deborah has the majority wrapped around her finger. She's talking about creative solutions. That phrase, creative solutions, made my stomach turn. The next Monday morning, I arrived at the quarry to find the entrance blocked by a dozen Meadowbrook Heights residents holding signs. Protect our air, residential rights matter, stop the dust. They had positioned themselves across the access road, preventing my trucks from entering or leaving. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Martinez arrived within 20 minutes and told the protesters they could demonstrate on the public right-of-way but could not block access to my property. Most of them moved. Deborah, of course, was there with her phone, live streaming the whole thing to a Facebook group she had created called Meadowbrook Environmental Justice Coalition. The protests continued sporadically over the next month. Then the HOA tried a different tactic. They filed a petition with the county to have the access road reclassified. The road leading to my quarry was an old ranch road that had been there for decades, classified as a public access route maintained by the county. The HOA argued that increased truck traffic had damaged the road and requested it be downgraded to a private road, which would require me to pay for all maintenance and potentially allow them to argue for weight restrictions. Frank and I fought that petition too. We showed the county records proving the road had carried commercial traffic for over 40 years and that my operation actually contributed to road maintenance through the property taxes I paid. The county rejected the HOA's petition. By mid-July, I was exhausted. The constant legal battles, protests, and harassment had taken their toll. My employees were stressed. 2 had quit, saying they did not want to deal with protesters yelling at them when they came to work. My health suffered. I lost 15 pounds from stress and was not sleeping well. Then I remembered the easement. I was going through old property documents late one evening, looking for historical traffic counts on the access road for yet another legal filing, when I came across a document from 1982. It was an easement agreement between my grandfather, Thomas Anderson, and the previous owner of what was now Meadowbrook Heights land. Back in the early 80s, the power company needed to run electrical lines to serve the rural areas east of my property. The most direct route cut across the corner of my grandfather's land. Rather than run lines around the property, which would have cost significantly more, the power company worked out a deal. My grandfather granted a permanent easement allowing electrical infrastructure across 15 acres of the property's eastern boundary. In exchange, the power company paid him $20,000 and guaranteed electrical service to the quarry. Here is what made it interesting. The easement was granted personally by Thomas Anderson, and the document specified that it could be revoked by his heirs if the served properties were used in a manner creating substantial interference with the grantor's legal property rights and business operations. That clause had been my grandfather's insurance policy. He was a shrewd man who understood that development might eventually come to the area. He wanted to make sure that if future neighbors tried to shut down his quarry, he would have leverage. I read the clause 5 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I called Frank at home, despite it being nearly 10 at night. "Frank, I need you to look at something," I said. "I think I found a way to end this." He came to my house the next morning. We sat at my kitchen table while he read through the easement document, his expression growing more interested with each page. "Sam, this is remarkable," he finally said. "This easement serves the entire eastern half of Meadowbrook Heights. According to the utility maps, at least 60 homes get their power through the lines on this easement. Can I actually revoke it?" I asked. Frank was quiet for a long moment, rereading the revocation clause. The language is clear. Substantial interference with your legal property rights and business operations. Given everything the HOA has put you through, the lawsuits, the protests, the complaints, I think you have a very strong argument that they have interfered substantially. What happens if I revoke it? You would need to provide formal notice to the power company and the property owners benefiting from the easement. There would likely be a grace period. But ultimately, if you revoke it, the power company would need to remove their infrastructure from your property, or negotiate a new easement agreement with you. And the Meadowbrook Heights homes served by those lines would need to find alternative power access. Which would mean, I pressed. Which would mean the power company would have to run new lines around your property, probably along the county road to the north. That would be expensive and someone would have to pay for it. Normally, that would fall on the served properties or the HOA. I leaned back in my chair thinking it through. So I would be doing to them what they have been trying to do to me, making it expensive and difficult to continue as they are. Essentially, yes. Though you would be doing it legally, exercising a right explicitly granted in a contract, unlike their attempts to shut you down. I thought about it for 3 days. I was not a vindictive person by nature. I did not want to hurt the reasonable residents of Meadowbrook Heights, people like Tom Wenzel who had been caught in the middle of this fight. But I was also tired of being attacked for operating a legal business. The HOA had shown no signs of backing off. If anything, Deborah seemed energized by the attention, treating the anti-Quarry campaign like a personal crusade. On Friday afternoon, I made my decision. Frank prepared the revocation notice, citing the extensive documentation of interference we had compiled through months of legal battles. We sent copies to the power company, the HOA board, and every property owner in Meadowbrook Heights whose home was served by the easement lines. The notice gave them 90 days to remove the infrastructure from my property or negotiate a new easement agreement under revised terms. Deborah called my cell phone 17 times that evening. I did not answer. She left voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to threatening. By the last message, she was screaming that I could not do this, that it was illegal, that she would have me arrested. The next morning, I found her waiting at the Quarry gate at 7 in the morning. I almost did not go down to talk to her, but I figured I might as well get it over with. "You cannot do this," she said immediately, waving a copy of the revocation notice. "This is extortion. This is blackmail." "It is neither," I replied calmly. "It is me exercising a contractual right that my grandfather negotiated in good faith 40 years ago. 60 families will lose power. No, they will not. The power company will find an alternative route. It will just cost money, same as your lawsuits cost me money." Her face flushed red. "We sued you because you are running an industrial operation in a residential area. I am running a commercial operation that predates your residential area by decades, a fact that every court has agreed with. You are doing this because we tried to protect our homes. I am doing this because you have spent the last year trying to destroy my business through legal harassment, protests, and defamation. You have cost me money, employees, and peace of mind. Now you are going to understand what that feels like." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something between a hiss and a growl. "If you do not withdraw this revocation, we will make your life hell. You have already been trying to do that, Deborah. It has not worked. Now maybe you will realize that I have rights too, and pushing someone into a corner makes them push back." I turned and walked back to my truck, leaving her standing at the gate. My hands were shaking slightly as I drove back to the office, adrenaline coursing through my system. I had never been good at confrontation, but something about finally having leverage in this situation felt empowering. The power company called later that day. A representative named Gary Thornton explained that they were reviewing the easement agreement and the revocation notice. He asked if I would be willing to discuss terms for a new agreement. "I am willing to discuss it," I said. "But any new agreement will require that the HOA and the served properties acknowledge my right to operate the quarry without harassment, and I want some financial compensation for the use of my land." "What kind of compensation?" Gary asked carefully. "The market rate for easements of this type is about $500 per rod per year. This easement covers roughly 40 rods, so $20,000 annually. That is the starting point for negotiation." There was silence on the line. "Finally," Gary said, "that is significantly more than the original easement terms." The original easement was granted as a courtesy by my grandfather with a one-time payment. Times have changed. So have my circumstances, thanks to the harassment from the people benefiting from that easement. I will need to discuss this with our legal team and the HOA, Gary said. You have 90 days, I reminded him. The reaction from Meadowbrook Heights was swift and dramatic. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that Sunday. Tom Wenzel texted me that night with updates. The meeting was apparently chaos. Deborah tried to maintain that I was bluffing, that I could not actually revoke the easement. But several residents had consulted attorneys who confirmed that the revocation clause was legally valid. The discussion turned to how much it would cost to run new power lines. The power company estimated that running alternative lines around my property would cost approximately $400,000. Under Montana utility law, that cost would typically be split between the utility company and the property owners benefiting from the service. The HOA would likely be looking at a special assessment of $300,000, split among 60 homes. That was $5,000 per household. Some residents were furious at me. Others were furious at Deborah for provoking the situation. The meeting ended with no resolution and a lot of shouting. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Some callers were angry Meadowbrook Heights residents demanding I back down. Others were reasonable people asking if we could work something out. I told everyone the same thing: talk to your HOA board and the power company. I was willing to negotiate a new easement under appropriate terms. Frank advised me to let the pressure build. Right now they are feeling what you felt for the last year, he said. Powerless, frustrated, and angry, let them sit with that for a while. It will make them more reasonable. The local media picked up the story. The same reporter who had done the anti-Quarry piece last year called for an interview. This time I agreed. Mr. Anderson, some residents are calling your revocation of this easement an act of revenge, the reporter said, camera rolling. It is not revenge, I replied. It is a property owner exercising a legal right. The HOA has spent the last year trying to shut down my business through protests, lawsuits, and complaints to every government agency they could find. They have cost me over $80,000 in legal fees alone, not to mention the stress and lost business. All because they bought homes next to an existing quarry and decided they did not like it. But don't you feel bad about affecting innocent homeowners who were not involved in the HOA disputes? I feel bad that those homeowners elected an HOA board that pursued such an aggressive and ultimately failed strategy against a legal business. But every one of those homeowners benefited from an easement across my property for years, paying nothing for that privilege. Now I am asking for fair compensation. That is not revenge. That is business. The story aired that evening with a much more balanced tone. They included footage of the earlier protests and interviewed Judge Chen, who declined to comment on the easement situation but noted that her ruling had been clear about the quarry's legal right to operate. Public opinion started to shift. Online comments on the news station's website ran about 50-50. Some people thought I was being petty. Others pointed out that the HOA had brought this on themselves by refusing to accept a legal court ruling. On Wednesday, I got a call from an attorney named Patricia Summers. She represented a group of Meadowbrook Heights residents who were not happy with how the HOA board had handled things. Mr. Anderson, my clients want to find a reasonable solution to this situation, she said. They understand you have been treated poorly, and they are willing to acknowledge your right to operate your business without interference. That is refreshing to hear, I said. They are also concerned about the HOA's handling of this entire matter. There is a movement to recall the current board, but in the meantime, they are wondering what it would take for you to agree to a new easement. I have told the power company my terms. $20,000 per year, and a formal acknowledgement from the HOA that they will cease all attempts to interfere with my legal quarry operations. Would you consider a lump sum payment instead of annual fees? Patricia asked. Some of my clients are concerned about the HOA's long-term financial stability and would prefer a one-time resolution. That was interesting. I had not considered that option. How large of a lump sum? I would need to discuss with my clients, but possibly in the range of $250,000 to $300,000. That would be less than running new lines, and it would give you immediate compensation for years of harassment. And the acknowledgement from the HOA. That would be part of the agreement. A formal resolution stating that the HOA recognizes your legal right to operate the quarry and will not file further complaints or lawsuits regarding the operation, provided you continue to meet all state and county regulations. I told her I would consider it and discuss with my attorney. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out the window at the quarry floor where my crew was loading trucks. This was what my grandfather had built, what he had protected with that clever easement clause. He had known that someday someone might try to push his family off this land. He had made sure we would have a way to push back. Frank thought the lump sum was a smart option. It gives you capital to invest in the business, and it ends the situation cleanly. Make sure the HOA resolution is ironclad, with significant penalties if they violate it. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia and I worked out the details. The agreement would include a $300,000 lump sum payment, funded by a special assessment on the 60 properties served by the easement. The HOA would pass a binding resolution prohibiting any board member or representative from filing complaints or taking legal action against the quarry unless there was a verified violation of state or county regulations. If they violated that agreement, they would owe me $500,000 in damages. The agreement also included a personal provision I insisted on. Deborah Patterson had to sign an individual non-disparagement agreement. She could no longer make public statements about the quarry, organize protests, or encourage others to take action against my business. If she did, she would be personally liable for damages. Patricia told me that Deborah fought that provision hard, but the other residents were done with her crusade. They wanted this resolved, and they blamed her for escalating the situation to this point. The HOA held another meeting to vote on the special assessment and the agreement terms. This time I attended. I sat in the back of the community center as 70 residents packed the room. The tension was palpable. Tom Wenzel stood up early in the meeting. I have lived in Meadowbrook Heights for 3 years. I have watched this board wage a war against illegal business, spending HOA money on lawsuits that we lost, organizing protests that accomplished nothing, and creating a hostile relationship with a neighbor who was here long before any of us. This is the result. We are paying for the board's arrogance and poor judgment. Several people applauded. Others shouted disagreement. Deborah tried to defend her actions, arguing that she was protecting property values and quality of life. But when the vote came, the special assessment passed 62-8. The residents wanted this over. The agreement was signed in mid-August at Frank's office. Patricia represented the HOA. Gary Thornton attended for the power company. Deborah was required to be there to sign her personal non-disparagement agreement. She looked like she had aged 5 years in the last 2 months. When it came time for her to sign, she looked at me with pure hatred. "You have destroyed this community," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "You did that by refusing to accept that you could not bully me into closing a legal business. I just had better leverage than you expected." She signed without another word. The payment cleared into my business account 3 days later, $300,000. It was enough to upgrade our crusher, buy a new excavator, and create a reserve fund for future legal expenses if needed. More importantly, it was acknowledgement that my rights mattered, that my grandfather's legacy deserved respect. The HOA passed the required resolution at their September meeting. They also voted to recall Deborah and the 3 board members who had most aggressively pursued the anti-quarry campaign. New board members were elected, including Tom Wenzel, who promised a more cooperative approach to community relations. But the story was not quite over. In late September, I noticed some unusual activity around the Meadowbrook Heights development. Vehicles coming and going at odd hours. Lights in empty homes that were supposedly vacant. I did not think much of it until Deputy Martinez stopped by the quarry one afternoon. "Sam, I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "We have been investigating some suspicious activity in your area. We have reason to believe someone has been planning to sabotage your equipment." My blood ran cold. Sabotage? What kind of sabotage? We are not sure yet. We got a tip from a concerned citizen in Meadowbrook Heights who overheard some disturbing conversations. We are taking it seriously. "Do you know who is involved?" Martinez hesitated. "We have some ideas, but I cannot share details of an ongoing investigation." "Just keep an eye out and report anything unusual immediately." I increased security at the quarry, installing additional cameras and hiring a night watchman. 2 weeks later, Martinez called me. "We made some arrests last night," he said. "I thought you would want to know." Deborah Patterson and 2 men from outside the area had been arrested for conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and vandalism. According to the sheriff's investigation, Deborah had used social media to connect with an environmental activist group based in Bozeman. She had convinced them that my quarry was an ecological disaster that needed to be stopped by any means necessary. The plan had been to break into the quarry and pour sand into the fuel tanks of all the heavy equipment, causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage. One of the men had experience with industrial sabotage from protests at mining operations in other states. What Deborah had not known was that one member of the activist group was actually uncomfortable with the plan and had contacted law enforcement. The sheriff's office had let the plan proceed far enough to make arrests, catching Deborah and the 2 men on my property with containers of sand and tools to break into the equipment. The charges were serious. Criminal conspiracy, criminal trespass, and attempted criminal mischief in Montana could result in significant prison time, especially given the dollar amount of damage they intended to cause. I was stunned when Martinez explained all this. "She was really going to destroy my equipment?" I asked. "The evidence is solid. We have recordings of planning conversations, text messages discussing the details, and we caught them in the act on your property. She is looking at a felony conviction." The case moved through the legal system over the next several months. Deborah's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney was not inclined to be lenient. Attempted sabotage of a legitimate business was not something they took lightly. In February, Deborah pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and criminal trespass. She was sentenced to 18 months in the Montana Women's Prison, followed by 2 years of probation. The 2 activists she had recruited received similar sentences. The day of her sentencing, I attended the hearing. I wanted to see it through to the end. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up. "Your Honor, this situation has consumed nearly 2 years of my life. I have done nothing wrong except operate a legal business that my grandfather built decades ago. I have followed every rule, respected every regulation, and tried to be a good neighbor. In return, I have been harassed, sued, protested against, and now someone tried to destroy my equipment and livelihood. All because I would not surrender my legal rights to appease an HOA that had no authority over my property. I hope this sentence sends a message that property rights matter and that disagreements, no matter how strongly felt, cannot be resolved through vandalism and sabotage." Deborah did not look at me during the statement. When the judge imposed the sentence, she kept her eyes down, her shoulders slumped. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. Tom Wenzel and the new HOA board reached out after the sentencing. They wanted to rebuild the relationship between Meadowbrook Heights and the quarry. We had several meetings where they asked what the HOA could do to be better neighbors. I appreciated the effort. I suggested they could educate new residents about the area's history and existing businesses before they moved in. I offered to do occasional tours of the quarry for interested residents, showing them how we operated and the environmental controls we used. I even agreed to give them advance notice of any particularly dusty operations so they could plan accordingly, though I made clear that was a courtesy, not an obligation. The relationship slowly improved. Some Meadowbrook Heights residents even hired my company for landscaping, stone, and driveway materials. The protests stopped. The complaints stopped. Life started to feel normal again. By spring, I was able to focus on the business instead of legal battles. We landed a major contract supplying aggregate for a highway expansion project near Columbia Falls. The new equipment I had bought with the easement payment made us more efficient and competitive. I hired back to full staff and gave everyone raises. One afternoon in April, I stood on the rim of the quarry, watching the sun set over the mountains. The valley spread out below in shades of gold and purple, the same view my grandfather must have seen when he first bought this land. He had built something worth protecting, and he had been smart enough to build in protections. I thought about everything that had happened. The stress, the anger, the sleepless nights, the satisfaction of standing up for myself. The exhaustion of fighting people who could not accept that their preferences did not override my rights. The strange, hollow feeling of watching someone go to prison for trying to hurt me. Life was not simple. People were not simple. But property rights, contracts, and the rule of law existed for a reason. They created boundaries that protected everyone, even when emotions ran high and disagreements felt personal. My phone buzzed with a text from Jack Morrison, my foreman. New crusher is running perfect. Best production numbers we've had in years. I smiled and typed back. Grandpa would be proud. As I drove home that evening, passing the neat houses of Meadowbrook Heights with their manicured lawns and mountain views, I felt something I had not felt in 2 years: peace. The quarry would continue. My employees had secure jobs. The community had learned that aggressive HOA tactics could backfire spectacularly. And I had learned that sometimes the best defense was leverage you did not even know you had until you needed it. My grandfather had taught me one final lesson through that easement document: always protect your rights, even when you do not think you will need to. Because someday someone will test you, and when they do, you need to be able to push back. The quarry continued operating, crushing limestone and aggregate for construction projects across northwestern Montana. The trucks rolled in and out, the equipment hummed, and dust rose and fell with the wind, just as it had for 50 years. Some things in life were constant, rooted in the land and the law, stronger than any HOA covenant or protest sign. That was enough for me.